So I really appreciated the learning together last time, and I think we did a really nice job about laying out in the Torah some of the types of gifts that are given. Some that are towards the Kohanim and the Leviim that could be sort of seen as money we give to religious causes, right? Like the tzedakah that you give to the shul or something of that nature. And then we particularly focused on the gifts to the poor, and that primarily was done not through the maaser, the tithing, but through the the gleanings and the agricultural gifts, etc., and the power that came through that in terms of dignity and empowerment and participation in society, all those ways in which it was worked better than a straight gift of money. And we reflected on how that also was something at a communal level, not at a personal, private level, and the institution of the soup kitchen that it transformed into. So that's sort of the topics that we discussed. Now, I know that during that and afterwards as well, some people wanted to answer the question about like, well, okay, that's one form of tzedakah. Like, what's included in tzedakah? Does tzedakah include gifts to the shul or religious causes and so on? So I will tell you that because of the interest in that, I'm going to switch the order of what I was planning in terms of the classes, unless there's a strong objection. What I was planning on doing actually for this second class was to talk about the psukim in the Torah that are often quoted as what we would call classic tzedakah. As the poor person comes and asks for money and you give them money and so on, and to see how those psukim in the simple sense of the Torah are really not talking about a gift of money, what we call tzedakah, but are really talking about lending money to the poor. And that the Torah really does not have the idea of just gifting the money to the poor, but it specifically speaks about lending money. But the loan often converts into a gift. How does the loan often convert into a gift? Can anybody imagine in the system of the Torah? You lend the poor person money, and let's say they're not able to pay it back. Then you have Shemitah. The Shemitah annuls it, and you don't get interest. So the whole lending system also is a way in which it more preserves the dignity of the poor. You're borrowing money. You're not begging for a gift. And that's really the system in the Torah. But from there, we use that as the basis for what we call standard tzedakah. A poor person asks for money, they come collecting, at the door, you give them some money and so on. So that's what I was going to do for this session, look at that in greater detail. But I think maybe we'll leave that for the third session. Now, anyway, I just summarized it all for you in 1 minute, so we don't have to do it. I think there's still a lot to be learned there. But and it's very powerful, I think, in the power of what lending money means. But what I want to do is we can get back to that, and I want to look at the question of the maaser ksafim, which is called like the giving the 10th of your income, and see about that. Why? Because when somebody asks me the question, like, okay, well, that was all very nice, Rabbi Linzer. You talked about a gift to the poor and lending money to the poor and this and that. But, when I talk about my giving tzedakah, and I think about the tzedakah I'm giving this year, I'm thinking about all the important religious institutions, my kids' day school, my shul, Torah. Anyway, that's what I think about in terms of tzedakah. So, like, I want to know, is that considered tzedakah? So, when somebody says, what counts as tzedakah? I have I think about this in terms of Gemara and Halacha. And the question therefore really is, like, does this count as the only meaningful way for me that question makes sense is, what do I have an obligation? Does this fulfill my obligation in tzedakah? I have an obligation of tzedakah. Certainly it's a mitzvah and it's a good thing, and so on, and in terms of all of the good deeds that I do, but is it considered to be one of the things I'm obligated to do? And to answer that question, I think we have to look at, well, what is the nature of our tzedakah obligation? And that really turns us to the question of maaser ksafim and this whole institution of giving 10%. So Does that make sense? Meaning, do people mean something else when they want to ask this question about like, well, what's included in tzedakah? Because, for me, like I said, just what I just said, for me, the question what's included in tzedakah means, well, what types of things can I give to that would mean that I'm doing the mitzvah of tzedakah, right? And okay, so then we have to look at what is the mitzvah of tzedakah. And the mitzvah, there are some mitzvahs that are clear in the Torah, all of those tithings and the grain and so on. And then there's the mitzvah that a poor person comes to you and says, I need money. And that's a mitzvah in the Torah. You have to open up your hands, which, as I said to you, in the simple sense means a gift, a loan, but that now becomes a gift. So if a poor person comes to me and says, I need money, I have to either lend them money or give them money. That's a mitzvah of the Torah. Okay, but most of our giving doesn't work that way. We're not leaving, gleanings in the field. We do sometimes encounter people on the street, on the subway, and so on. So that does happen. But most of our tzedakah giving comes from, we're looking at our income and checks we're writing and maybe solicitations we get from various tzedakahs and various religious institutions. Where is that a mitzvah? And that really begins the conversation about Maaser Ksafim. Okay, so that's why we're going to look at this issue. Does anybody want to ask any questions or clarify, sort of what they might have in mind in terms of the question of what is tzedakah before we jump into this issue?
It's just ironic that most of our tzedakah nowadays goes through those official channels, and we probably don't give as much to people directly asking us on the subway.
Right, and I think that that's what you also find in the institution about Maaser Ksafim, which is that that institution is because if you just wait for somebody to come and ask you for money, you're not going to wind up giving a lot of tzedakah. But again, in the Torah you would have, because you would have given a tithe and you would have given the gleanings of your field, and you would have, and some people anyway would have given even without it being turned into a halacha or practice, just because they're philanthropic. Okay, but the institution of Maaser Ksafim ensured that a certain amount of, of income went to these causes, even without, having agricultural gifts, and even without having people approach you, and ask for money. So, but you're right, it's ironic, right? And that's why we're going to look at it, because it's doesn't fit into one of those easy categories.
Rav Linzer,
yes.
You get to the issue of people on the subway, okay? We know that there's a big drug problem in the country. Okay.
Right.
I mean, I've had people come up to me. I go to the opera and I wait for the express bus at 11 o'clock at night, taking me back to Riverdale. And these strange people come up to you, and you know that they're going to use it for drugs. Okay.
Right. So I want to say, right. So you are right. So within that mitzvah of the Torah, that if somebody asks you for money, you have to give it. The rabbi said exactly addressed this issue of how do we know? They were less concerned about what are they going to use it for, because that was less of an issue, but they were concerned about how do you know this person is honest. And the rabbi, is really genuinely representing what they say they're representing. But Purim, on the one day of the year, Purim, the halacha is anybody that says they need money, you believe them and you give them money. The other 364 days of the year, or 363 if you're going by the Hebrew calendar, you basically have to say like I need to know that that proof that you genuinely are in need and that the money is going to fill a genuine need. So you are correct, and I was speaking very loosely before, that even when the poor people come to you on the subway, that's not really the Torah obligation, because you don't know that that money is going to be used for the right purpose. So
I'd rather donate it to a rehab center.
Exactly. And that's what the signs in the subway say, give but don't give here, and so on. So correct. So that even closes off yet another avenue, so we're not giving the agricultural gifts. The Torah still says somebody comes and asks you for money, but the rabbis say that only when you know that it's legit and where the money is going. So that closes off a whole other sort of, phenomena, which maybe it's a good thing that it closes it off. Although still, that's when the Mishulachim come to the door, they have the signed piece of paper. They're showing that it's legit. But right, we're left with very little of those cases of the Torah that the Torah talks about in terms of tzedakah. And that's why the real thing now to talk about is this idea of maser ksafim. Lance, you have your hand. I'm not hearing you, Lance. You're not on mute. So I can't hear you. No, Lance, try to figure out what's going on. I'm going to take Bert's question while you're figuring that out. I'm going to come back to you. Bert.
Me now.
Yeah.
Oh, you got
Okay.
it? Okay, Lance,
Yes.
go ahead.
See the problem. Okay, my simple question. My question is, can we think of tzedakah as a subset of tikkun olam?
Yes, except the idea of tikkun olam is a banner, that's like a major central tenet of the non-Orthodox movement. It comes from a pasuk in Aleinu, which is, the Taken Olam b'Malchut Shaddai, which speaks about, ultimately creating a more perfect world. But it is not a obligation. It's not nowhere near the same type of concrete obligation that tzedakah is. Now, if you want, tzedakah is a much more well-defined set of mitzvot and obligations and practices than the sort of abstract, idea of tikkun olam. So, that requires a separate conversation, but it doesn't help concretize it by talking about tikkun olam. It actually more abstracts it.
Well, okay, would you consider then tzedakah a subset of social action?
Well, again, I don't like the idea of subset because subset makes it sound like there's a higher level obligation. I would sort of say it let me reframe it in the terms that sort of are common to me in terms of the rabbinic thinking. Is the goal of tzedakah, because there's a general question of all mitzvot, right? What is the reason for any particular mitzvah? What's the reason for Shabbos? Is it to spend, is it to have a sense of our, not being slaves to our own labor? Is it social justice? Because when people work for us, we let them not work. Is it to spend time communing with God? Any mitzvah you can ask, what are the goals that are served? What are the ta'amei ha-mitzvah? And there's a whole industry and Jewish thinkers to try to speculate what are the different reasons within various mitzvot. And many of them obviously have multiple layers. So when we talk about tzedakah, I will say that there are a couple of things that are discussed in terms of what are the reasons for tzedakah. This is the way I'm reframing your question, Lance, in sort of classic rabbinic terms. Okay, so one of them, interestingly, which I don't think anybody here might have said, but it comes from a certain ethical framework that focuses on character development and character traits. Rambam said the reason for so many mitzvot was to make us better people. So he says the reason for tzedakah is that it improves us. It makes us generous people. It makes us caring, compassionate people, which is why Rambam says it's actually better to give many times $1 100 times than to give a $100 donation. Because if you give $1 100 times, you are cultivating this behavior within yourself, and you are making yourself a more caring and more generous type of a person. So Rambam focuses totally on character development. Others, of course, focus on, number one, just addressing a profound societal need. The poor are suffering. They need food. Religious institutions are doing important work. They need to be able to do that work, right? So by giving the tzedakah, you are helping like social justice, if you want to call it social justice, or really addressing profound societal needs. That's probably the more sort of obvious way to think about it. I will say that there's always a question about when you talk about social justice, you use that phrase, it tends to point more towards systemic issues than addressing immediate needs. And that might be that when you lend money as opposed to give a gift of money, or when you give to certain institutions as opposed to giving to a particular poor person, that might be able to be helpful at the systemic level rather than just at the immediate need level. So yes, I would say that tzedakah does serve those goals, but you start halachically, you start with the idea that there are these mitzvot. Then we can speculate, and those are very specific and concrete. And then we can sort of speculate what are the various goals that are served. And sometimes it depends, and sometimes it's a mixture of them. Bert,
One quick point, and that is,
yes,
would the sages agree with me
that one.
anonymous tzedakah is superior to tzedakah, which is quid pro quo?
Yes, I mean, that definitely Rambam, and not the sages, it's the famous Rambam's levels of tzedakah, that the anonymous is the highest level. The poor person is not, it gets to protect their dignity. It's not being done for any other reason. You know, the rabbis were totally happy to have people name buildings after them because they understood that we have ego, and sometimes the ego helps drive us to do important things and they help give tzedakah. But if somebody is able to do it and being anonymous, that is clearly ideal, and that definitely is in, you know, a major tenet. Bert, you've been waiting to ask the question.
Yeah. Here's the question. Historically, when we were doing Trumos and Maestros and stuff like that, was there also an obligation on those, say, people who were not involved in these things, artisans? Was there an obligation on artisans or other people who did things, the millers?
Right.
And
So, right. So we're going to see that. So the answer is no until we start talking about Maser Ksafim. So we will get to that very soon.
okay,
Okay.
very good.
Moshe, you had a question? I see a hand up on Moshe's iPad.
Hi,
I have a question.
I think my question has to do is the source of Maser Ksafim basically the Maser Fa'aniyim and those
Well, that's
years?
exactly the question that we're going to ask. Okay. So now
And
let's
that
get
would only
started.
be 2 or 3 times a cycle,
Well,
whereas
right. So all
we
of this is
consider it
perfect
every
segue.
year.
Correct. So I teach, so hopefully all these questions will be answered. So let us now turn, perfect segue, and we're now going to turn to the sources and to look at this issue about Maser Ksafim. Okay, so let's hold off on some questions for a bit. We've had a lot of good introductory discussion, and now let's take a look at, and I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger here, hopefully so people can see. Okay, is that clear enough for most people? Okay.
Yes.
So let's take a look, okay? We'll start with, as I said, what are the mitzvah of tzedakah in the Torah? We discussed all the agricultural gifts and so on, okay? And here's the pasuk in Devarim that is the one that we most latch onto in terms of giving money, okay? First number one, Ki yebuchai evyon me'acharechecha be'echad she'arecha, v'artzecha she'er Hashem Elokecha noten lach, lo tameitech lebavcha v'lo tikpotet yadcha me'achicha hafir. If there is amongst you a poor man at your gates with what gives you, don't harden your heart, don't shut your hand. Open up your hand to him. And you should, and that word means lend him. Okay, so normally we bracket that when we think about tzedakah. Open up your hand, give him what he needs. But actually, as I said before, and that's a separate, that we'll do next week, actually it's about lending, but the loan ultimately will get annulled. So that becomes the basis for giving money. That is the straight mitzvah in the Torah. It is a double mitzvah. Open up your hand, patoach tiftach, and lo tikpotzet yadcha. Don't grab, don't grab your hand back. Okay, don't shut your hand. All right, give when you are asked. That is the classic mitzvah of tzedakah in the Torah that is not agricultural. It's to a poor person. It's when you're asked, and technically speaking, it begins with the idea of lending. Rambam, in his list of mitzvot, of mitzvah of gifts to the poor, okay, gives all of these things. We won't read them. You can eyeball them. They're all basically these agricultural gifts. And at the very end, you have 11 to separate tithes for the poor, which is only 2 years out of 7. 12 to give charity to one's ability. That's open up your hand. And 13, not to harden your heart. Okay, but all of these are about giving to the poor. All right. Now, this is about these sources we actually did. Okay. Now we're going to look here at going on to Maaser. So as we discussed, those mitzvot are not going to lead to necessarily a lot of giving, and certainly not to nowadays, and certainly not to giving when it's not directed to the poor. So let's take a look at Maaser, and here again we discussed some of this last time. We're going to be looking at it with a slightly different framing now. Okay, and we didn't look at the Psukim inside last time. So in Vayikra you have the following: Vayikra Chafayim. Kodesh, Hashem hu Kodesh Hashem. Every tithe from what you plant and from the fruit of the tree goes to God. You know, it should go to God. The im you go each masro, and if you want to redeem it, so you say halal. Then you add a fifth. So what Maser is this talking about? What does it mean? It goes to God, sanctified to God. You can redeem it. So this is I'm looking here only at the tithes that are somewhere. Yes. Let me say something. I'm looking right now at the tithes.
Linzer, could you make it, it's very hard to read. Could you make it any bigger?
Sure, I definitely can make it bigger.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Is that good or do you need it bigger still?
Better, thank you.
Do you want it a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Good? Okay. Thank you for speaking up. Okay. So what I'm looking at now is things that could serve as models for tzedakah that is not to the poor. Okay. So the first one here is this idea of a tithe that says it's holy to God and that you can redeem it. What is that talking about? This is what is called Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe. And that is, as we discussed last time, you do it 4 out of the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, and you bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, and you eat it in front of the Beit HaMikdash. And the pasuk there says, and let's take a look. Let's just jump. The order here was wrong. If you just jump to source number 8, okay, this is like the second part of source number 6, conceptually. You shall take a tithe every year. What do you do with this tithe? You shall eat it in front of God at the place God dwells there. All of the tithes, whether it's the tithe of your grain or the tithe of your firstborn animals, why are you bringing this tithe up to Jerusalem and eating it there? So that you should learn to fear God, meaning the goal of this is to put you in a regular basis in closeness to the Beit HaMikdash and in closeness to this religious place and where the Kohanim are and the sense of God's presence, so that helps your religious life and your connection to God. So here's a tithe whose goal is the betterment of our religious lives. Now, it's true, you ultimately eat from the food, but you have to wind up doing the whole travel to Yerushalayim and so on, and the firstborn actually go to the Kohanim. So while this is not directly giving this money to the Beit HaMikdash, okay, it certainly is a what do you call it? It certainly is a clear use of giving a maaser that's for our religious lives. All right. The other one that can be seen as a model, again, the order should be switched here, is source number here. I'll switch it right now. Okay. Magic. I turned 6 into 7 and 7 into 6. Okay. Source number 8. Okay, which is in Bamidbar. This is the maaser to the Levi'im. And as I told you, this can be conceptualized, that the Levi'im can be conceptualized as a landless poor class, but also they're the ones that are devoted to serving the people and serving their religious needs. So here the pasuk says the following in Bamidbar: I have given the tithe to them as an inheritance. Why? In exchange for the labor that they do in the Ohel Moed. Okay, so there is here an idea that this is money that goes to help support, religious functionaries, necessary religious functions that are taking place in institutions and so on. So the model exists beyond just giving to the poor, of giving regular maaser. The maaser B'Levi was given 6 out of the 7 years. It was given every year other than Shemitah, and giving, and another tithe that's 4 out of 7 years that brought us to the Beit HaMikdash to help support our religious life, okay, and our religious institutions. So these serve not as obligation, because this is only when you're growing grain in the Beit HaMikdash in Israel, but certainly they serve as important models. What I guess I could add and should add, is that of course the Torah is the building of the Mishkan. Everybody contributes to building the Mishkan, and the Torah talks about when somebody sanctifies their property to the Beit HaMikdash. How do you redeem property that is sanctified? Clearly, it was a well-established practice that you sanctify things and give them to the temple. Okay, but that is not as much as an institution as and this is really seen as a regular institution. Okay, so and then we of course discussed give the tithe to the poor. So what do we have right now? Let me open up a new page because I think it was very helpful to everybody when I wrote things down. Okay, can people see the blank piece of paper I just opened up? Or are you still looking at the source sheet? No, okay, hold on. I gotta do a separate screen share. Okay, all right. So let's talk about what we said. Okay, in the Torah, right? We have, Maser and agricultural gifts don't buy nowadays. If we're talking about our obligation, okay, here, well, no. Our Tzedakah obligation. Okay. We have giving to the poor when asked, which is loan/gift. Okay, which is like open your hand, do not burden your heart. Okay, that is very limited to heart and when asked. Okay, so now we are looking at, okay, that's our obligations. Now we're looking at what models do we have? Models in the Torah. Okay, not necessarily obligations, but what are our models? Okay, so one, of course, was, one is tithes to the poor. Cultural poor. Okay. Where they need years 2, 4, 5 goes to bring person back with God. So that's all that religious lives. Then you have 5 to Levi every year, which in one place can be seen as because of religious service, support religious institutions and whatever and whatever, etc. and the people. And okay, fine. So, so these are our models. Let me just finish point. So this is what we've said so far. These are our models. Okay. There's also, we can sort of mention, I don't know, gift donations to building Mishkan, sanctifying objects. Okay. So these are models that exist, but those aren't obligations. So we have obligations which sort of have, no longer apply, and we have models that we can use, but those aren't obligations. And Master Ksafim is going to come and basically become a practice that is going to say, let us take from these models and turn it into a regular practice of giving 10% to tzedakah. And then the question will be, is that an obligation? Is that a minhag? But ultimately, the obligations run a little dry. There are plenty of models, plenty of reasons in the Torah that we see the concept of doing this. And now how do we turn that into practice? That's going to be what we're going to look at. Okay,
All right,
yes,
Linzer.
Bert, you had a question. Yep.
Yeah, two things. One is, could you send me the source sheets as well as the
Yes,
thing that
definitely.
you, okay, that's first of all. Second of all, when you do bring, the stuff to Israel, Meiser Shani,
Jerusalem,
you know,
yeah.
to Yerushalayim. So, isn't that in fact also going to wind up being another form of tzedakah? Because you're not going to be able to go to Yerushalayim, eat all the stuff plus the fifth extra,
That's
assuming,
true. And that's true. And you know what? The tithe to the Levi also, is also, yeah, like your thing first, okay? Right. And the Torah talks about also shared with others, so supports for, and the Levi can also be conceptualized as support for landless. Wow.
and
Right.
it was your analysis last week that the monies for the Kohanim is not communal in nature. It's more a function of the fact that Kohanim didn't have any land, or
No,
is it?
that the Torah says that by the Levi'im. The Torah says by the Levi'im, the ein lo chelek v'nachala imach. Okay, the Torah says specifically by the Levi'im because he does not have a portion and inheritance among you. The Torah actually says that explicitly by the Levi'im, and the Levi'im are conceptualized as poor. The Kohanim are never conceptualized that way. Okay.
Right. So I guess the question then is, so why don't we say that the Kohanim who do other things, they offer sacrifices, but they also teach and they do other things. Isn't that also a source for the?
Yes. Thank you. So I should say that. Okay. So all the gifts to the Kohanim, that should be added. Thank you. Gifts to the Kohanim. Okay, which include a lot of things. Truma, Bikurim, firstborn animals are eaten as sacrifice, and I don't know, first steering of sheep, etc. Okay, now the question to this is, we discussed this last time, what is conceptually why we are giving it to the Kohanim? Are we giving it to the Kohanim as for their service, or are we giving it to the Kohanim because ultimately, if you look at this whole list is about first. The first of your grain, the first of your fruit, the first of your animals, the first of your shearing of your sheep, right? And therefore, it is likely that this can be conceptualized as as a gift to God that gets delivered to the Kohen. Okay, that's the idea of and the Torah often talks about, the first goes to God, first to God. Okay, so it could be possibly, for their service. Okay, so by the Levi as well, right? We have the same, the same two possibilities. I mean, in each one of these, they can, this is a problem. I know it's confusing to people, but I have to be intellectually complete here. So all of these things can have multiple elements. Okay, Maaser Sheni is primarily about religious, right? Levi, I think, can be seen as primarily about religious, but there is an element that it could be seen as to the poor. Kohanim, I think, Bert wants to say that that's in exchange for their religious service, but I think the Torah more conceptualizes that as a way of giving to God that just gets delivered to the Kohanim. So, so there are different, now I want to say something, by the way, let's not downplay that, because as I'm talking, I'm realizing when I want to give tzedakah, I might feel I want to thank God for what God has given me. I want to give money back to God. How am I going to give my money back to God? Let me find a nice religious institution that represents for me, God, I've got doing God's work. and that's the way that I'll give to God. So actually, you're right in that this is the way of thinking about it, right? It could just be a mindset issue. Is it like, hey, this show does really important work. I care for the show. It's a religious institution. I'm going to give to the show, right? And that's sort of like starting by thinking about the religious service. Or are you going to say, no, I want to just give for my money back to God, and a good place to give it is the show. So I think these two, you're right. I should not separate these two so much, because ultimately, even though this is the conceptual reason for it, it ultimately does wind up being, to support religious activities, to support religious institutions and the people and the whatever, and what do we call it, clergy, etc. Right. So I think it's good here to distinguish between motivation and ultimately how it gets delivered. All right. Yes, there was a question.
Yes, I had
Is
a
this getting
question.
too confusing for people, or are people still basically with? Yes, David.
Yes, when you mentioned the 10%, I always would like to know, what are your thoughts about in Pirkei Avot, where it says some people say the 10% is like the people of Saddam?
Okay, so you're getting to the practical, and I think maybe it's time to get to the practical because this has a lot in theoretical. So I want to move on. Okay, what I'm going to do here, maybe to help people, is I'll use different colors. All right. So blue is going to be for the poor. Whoops, hold on. And get another color for the religious stuff. So, okay, green is religious. Okay, so all of these are to religious institutions, recognizing that there's other elements here, that Meiser Sheni also supports the poor, and that the ties to the Levi can also have an element of the poor. But these are our various models, okay? So people see this?
Yep.
We have all these models. Now we have to turn models into practice, because models is not halacha. All right? So let's talk about the practice of giving 10%, and then that will hopefully, if we don't have time today, we don't have to do next class on the idea of lending. I have a feeling that it might make more sense to just devote both this time and next time to this idea of the Maaser, because there's a lot to say about the Maaser. Okay, and the question about where does the money go? Is it just 10%? How do you think about it? So let's first talk about this idea of giving a tenth of your wealth to something, as not only we showed a model in the Torah, let's also show in practice. This has actually been an ancient practice that you already see in the Torah. It has nothing to do with agriculture and anything like that. All right, and it starts with Abraham. Let's take a look and read in source number 10. So Melchizedek, this is when Abram came back after fighting the war against the 4 kings, and he had all of their booty. And this person, Melchizedek, who also was a Kohen to El Elyon, which presumably means God. Okay. I will say, by the way, that was funny. I will say, by the way, that biblical scholars say that El Elyon was actually a name of a Canaanite god, and that what Abraham did is he sort of folded that in and co-opted that, and sort of, because it means supreme God, sort of, and to Abraham's understanding of the one true God. But anyway, but we'll bracket all that. So he Melchizedek praised and blessed Abraham and said, Baruch Abraham Elohim, bless the Abraham, Konei Shemayim v'aretz, from the God of Most High, the owner of heaven and earth. Baruch Elohim, blessed is the God of the Most High. Hashem yigein tzarecha b'yadecha, that handed over your enemies into your hands. V'yitein lo ma'aser mito. He gave them a tenth of everything. So who the he here is a little ambiguous. I mean, the subject of the verse was Melchizedek, but it's a little bizarre. Why is Melchizedek giving him a tenth, and what's the everything? It seems much more likely that it is means that Avram just came back and he took all of this booty from the war, and he is now giving of that, of his, he just had a big windfall, millions of dollars, and he is now going to give it to Malki Tzedek, who is a Kohen for God and represents God. And that is his way of recognizing, giving it to God, recognizing God in what he received. Okay, you have this repeated by Yaakov. This is when he has the dream of the angels going up and down. I'm now in source 11. Yep, Beit Elohim. This is the one thing I didn't put back. This stone will be a house of God. The full everything you give me now that I'm running over to, out of Israel, out of the land of Israel, and I'm running to Lavan, everything you give me, aser asrenu lach, I will give a tenth back to you. So here we are not talking about agriculture grown in Israel. He's leaving Israel, and his wealth comes from all of his sheep, not his agriculture. Now, we never exactly see where does he give this back to God. What does it mean? I will give it to you. This gets to the idea that we were talking about the Kohen and about giving the first to God. Giving a tenth is also, I'm giving it to God. How do you give it to God? I'll figure out what that means. I'll either give it to the poor, right, in the way of doing God's work, or maybe not. Maybe specifically, if you want to symbolize giving it to God, you're supposed to give it to a religious institution and not the poor. Okay, so here you have this idea of giving a tenth that is not at all based on agriculture. It's based on God helps me, in the wealth that in the money that I earn, God's hand is there. I want to recognize it. I am going to give it back to God. We'll figure out how that translates. Likely, maybe poor, likely some religious institution. Yes, Tova.
What is the significance of a tenth? I mean, why can't it be a third? Why can't it be a fifth?
Right.
Why can't it be a 20th?
Right. That's a really good question. I don't have the answer. I would just say, the Torah could have picked, I don't know, because clearly the practice started before the Torah gave it as a mitzvah, right? It started in ancient society, so, and we know, obviously the whole base 10 is very fundamental, 10 fingers and so on. So it's like, if you think about, you have 10 fingers and 10 portions, the first portion goes to God. It probably as likely is just about that. We think in those terms. So this is the first of the portions. It also could be, if you want to think about it, that, it's a manageable demand, right? 20%, 30%, that's asking a heck of a lot. Right? This is something that is manageable. So you want to practice to be something that can be adopted widespread by society. But it's a good question. But clearly we're dealing with something that came as a practice of people. It was already being practiced before God had to command it. This intuition that if you what you get from God, you give back. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is, like I said, like one portion. If you think in tens. Okay. So the Gemara, Reshit Rabbah, says Avram was the one, first instituted the idea of tithing. Okay, but in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it makes it spells it out a little bit more that it is about this idea of tithing from wealth. Okay, so let's just read this source number 13. Rabbi Meir Omer, Avram Hitchel Rishon La'aser. Avram was the first one who instituted it. I said like it was an ancient practice. But okay, the first example we know is Abraham. Okay? After that, maybe he was the first we know about, and after that, this became a practice. He took a tithe from everything that he had retrieved from the property of Sodom and Amorah. It's called Maaser Rechush, Lot ben Achiv, and everything. Also remember, Lot's property had also been seized in the war. So he gave, before giving it back to Lot, okay, he gave a tenth of all of that because he had legal rights to all of that. But not from the Shem ben Noach. He gave it to Shem, right? It's identifying Malki Tzedek with Shem. All right, so it's just a nice more elaboration on the pasuk. Was there a question? I thought I heard a question. No,
I guess it was Malki
Wait,
Tzedek
this
giving a
is
tenth to
Bert.
Abraham,
So
or
just-
Abraham is giving
I'm
a
sorry.
tenth to Malki Tzedek?
what?
Who gave the tenth first, Malki Tzedek or Abraham?
No. The verse is a little ambiguous, but it only makes real sense to read the verse that Abraham gave the tithes, the tenths to Melchizedek. He came back with all this booty. Melchizedek came out and blessed him. You know, in hindsight, it was very smart of Melchizedek to be the first religious figure to bless Abraham when he came back. He gave him a blessing from God, and Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of all of the booty that he had.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, Bert.
Yeah, does this mean because that you're supposed to give from 10% of your assets? Does it, in other words, from all, does that imply that tzedakah is not based on your income, but based on your total wealth and assets?
No, this was income. This was, he went to war and he retrieved all of this property. And Yaakov is running out from Canaan, he says, whatever you give me, meaning I'm going penniless, so everything I get is going to be income, right? So whatever you give me, what you like, if somebody has never given Master in their lives, then okay, they can take an assessment of all the wealth God has given them in the past that they have yet, all the whatever property that they have yet to give income from. But the framing is, I just got this from you. Here's a tenth. In the end of the day, Bert, it won't be a difference. If you're always giving a tenth, you will have given a tenth of all your property, right?
No, because if you have 90% left over from last year, you have to give another 10% on that.
No, yes, that's true. Nice. You won't be giving a tenth of your current property, but everything you have in the bank has been tithed, right? All of your assets have at one point been tithed. And that's the idea of the Torah, not to every year assess your current wealth. It's like everything, God, you have given me this year. Last year I gave you a tenth from what you gave me last year, and this year I'm giving you a tenth from what you give me this year.
Is that a commandment?
No.
It's
So that's the point. What Mastic Stuffin we have to see is taking this practice that we know already from Abraham, taking these models that we have in the Torah about the various agricultural ties, and turning it into halacha or to regular practice. Because right now there's no mitzvah, there's no halacha. It's just a practice that some people were doing. And what we're going to see is it's going to become a sense of an obligation, or at least a sense of a strong practice.
Because that's a big, even though people have a certain amount of money, say you have $100,000, that means you have to give $10,000, right?
Right.
But you're spending it on yeshivas, and you spend,
right.
it's still a lot to, it's not a lot.
Right.
It's not.
So all of this is going to be what we discuss next time. So clearly I have to do this over next time, because now we have a couple of questions. What, only a tenth or more? What sources does it go to? And your question was implicitly like, wait a minute, are we talking about gross or net? What about all my expenses, right? What about the fact that if I'm paying shul dues and I'm paying tuition to my kids' yeshiva, that's religious causing. That's a count towards my 10%. And I don't have yeshiva tuition is so high, I'm never gonna have to worry about my success as long as I'm paying yeshiva tuition. Right? So all of those questions we will deal with next time. Those are the right questions to ask. Okay, Milton.
Yeah, Melchizedek was not Jewish. How does that permeate into modern practice? I mean, we do give.
Right. So he represented what at the time was a religious institution, a religious person devoted to the true God. He represented that at the time. Okay. There were no other, now we have other alternatives. I mean, I think if somebody wanted to say, let's say I happen to be on a deserted island and the only cause I can give to is to some, I don't know, generic temple to God or something like that. Is that a good use of my time? But right now we have alternatives, The point is that it started with the concept of, I want to give this back to God. Now, here's the giving back. Now, how do I concretize that? Because I can't throw it up to heaven. So how do I concretize it? I give it to something that represents God. So do God's work, give it to the poor, okay? So at the time of Abraham, that was the choice. Nowadays, there are different choices, okay? But if what you're asking is, well, can I give it to, like, if there's, I don't know, a non-denominational religious organization that is doing X, Y, and Z overseas, like, or something, can I Can I go ahead and give it to them? I think it's a similar question also, can I give it to the non-Jewish poor, right? That's also an important question. So we're going to have to ask that question, circle back to that about what if it's not, does it have to be specifically Jewish? Okay, so we will circle back to that. Moshe, and then Lance. Moshe, you're on
Yeah,
mute.
yeah, I'm sorry, I had to unmute. I thought that the Midrash said that Abraham gave back everything and only took a tenth for himself to give to the soldiers, his 300 soldiers that did the fighting.
No, so you're thinking about the pasuk. The pasuk is Abraham says when the king of Sodom and Gomorrah say to Abraham, they say, "Ken li hanavesh baruchush kachlas," give me the captives, and you can keep the money. And Abraham says, "Giladai rakasher afu anearim v'chelak hanashim asher alchiyati hey mifus hakam," right? The low toma mifut vatzrok now, like not from a shoelace do I want to take from it, because I don't want you to say you made Abraham rich, and I don't want to be sort of in your debt. So Abraham actually refuses to keep the money in the end. It's true, and it's actually quite interesting. First, he gives a tithe of it to God. It's his decision whether to hold on to it or not. And in the end, he gives it all back, except for paying for his troops and whatnot, as you said. So that is correct. He does do that in the end. Okay, but that's because he did not want to be in the debt, in the gratitude of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you for pointing that out. That is the other part of the story. Yes, Lance, question.
Okay, if I give money, let's say I'm a member of HIR, which I am, and I support the halachic setting for HIR. Now, I love Rabbi Yitzchak Greenberg, and Rabbi Yitzchak Greenberg supports Hadar. Hadar is egalitarian.
Right.
What happens if I support Hadar, or even worse, support Park Avenue Synagogue?
Right.
Violates every halacha on Shabbos.
So I think, okay, so all of those are, I'm going to put all of those in the, to circle back to you next time. And if I forget anyone, you can all ask me. But all of these are variations of what is a legitimate use. And does it poor? Is it religious? If it's religious, does it have to be Jewish? If it's Jewish, does it have to be halachic? Right? All of those are excellent questions. So I'm not going to answer them now. This is going to force all of you to come back for next time. Okay. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to just make 1 or 2 more points. Moshe, you have a question? Or is your hand still up from before? Okay, let me use the last 5 minutes. No, I'm gonna call moratorium on questions right now. I'm gonna use the last 5 minutes to show the different issues about where to begin the conversation of how this began to become widely accepted practice. And then we will next time go back and try to address all of those very practical questions. Okay, so I will tell you the following. This was in the time of the Middle Ages of the Rishonim, like 13th century and on. This was widely accepted practice in Ashkenaz, in the German, French sort of communities, and then later Eastern Europe. And it was not widely accepted practice in Sfarad, in Spain, and and Portugal, and then whatever, North Africa, etc. So this idea of taking this concept of Masech Ksafim and making it a regular thing, for some reason became very, very well established in Ashkenaz. And then within the Ashkenazi Rishonim and later post-him, the attempt is to begin to explain like what is the nature of the obligation. Okay, so let's take a look and start with Tosfos in source number 13. This is 13th century Ashkenaz. So on the verse, you shall give it. He says, I'll just read it in English. It states in the Sifrei. The Sifrei is a work of the Tanaitic period, from the Mishnah period on Dvarim. On the verse, you shall tithe all the grain of your field. The Sifrei says the following: I only know that grain is obligated in tithe. When do I know interest in business profits and all other gains? The verse teaches all. You shall tithe all the grain of your fields. Why did it add the word all? To include interest in business profits and all matters of profit. Okay, so Tosfos cites a very early source, a source from the time of the Mishnah that says the word all in the verse comes to include even business profit. Now, if we take this seriously, that would lead us to a conclusion that this obligation of tithing income is of biblical nature. You know, the rabbis interpret the verse to include all income. There's only one little problem, which is this source doesn't really exist. Okay, it's clearly and you know that it was a later source. There's a tell that this source actually came from the Middle Ages and did not come from the Tannaitic period. Okay, because what's the tell? Because the source says, how do I know you're chayav in maaseh? By ribit and pragmatia. So pragmatia is like commerce. Ribit is charging interest on loans. The Jews only began to make their money. It's the first thing mentioned here. The Jews only began to make their money by lending through interest in the Middle Ages. It was not at all the case in the time of the Talmud. So clearly, this is a medieval source that got misattributed, not intentionally, but misattributed to an early source in the Talmud. So Tosfos bases it on a misattributed source and seems to indicate that it's a Torah obligation, but nobody really believes that. Okay, that is okay. Okay, let's go now to source number 18, and we'll start seeing some other opinions. This is the Or Zarur. Or Zarur, 13th century Afghan. The man knew, so he quotes the verse of "You shall take a tithe." We learn from this a mitzvah for the person to tithe his money, and the more he increases, the more he will increase his wealth, etc. So he just sort of naturally says, "Yeah, there's a mitzvah to give tithe from grain, so there's a mitzvah to give tithe from money." The first person to really honestly discuss, or whatever, clearly discuss, I shouldn't say honestly, the question of where this comes from is the Maharam of Wittenberg. People might have heard of him. He was 13th century, the teacher of the Rush, the major Ashkenazi authority. And here's what he writes, and we'll end with this. Regarding Meiser money, it appears to me that in as much as people have established the practice, so notice the phrase, people have established the practice. Okay, that's the key phrase there. All right. As much as people have established the practice to give it to the poor, one can't change the use of the money to apply to another mitzvah. For it appears as if one is stealing from the poor. So his initial question is, can you give it to the short, or do you have to give it to the poor? And he says, since the practice is to give it to the poor, you can't, it's like they have rights to it. That practice has established that they have rights and you can't change it. We'll see other opinions next time. For although this is not biblical, but rather only custom. Okay, everybody see that? The idea of giving a tithe from your money is only custom. Okay, nevertheless, this has been the established practice and so on. So we'll end there now, okay? Which is what we have seen is, I know that was a lot to try to squeeze in on the last minute. I'm sorry, that was my bad. But what we have seen is, I'll just right here, what we have seen. The last things we have seen is here, okay, Ma'aser Kisafim, okay, we have seen that it is, practice begun by Abraham and Yaakov, a way of giving back to God. So maybe specifically religious institutions. Okay. And then we have Tosafot cites a misattributed early source that makes it biblical. All the produce of the field. Okay. And then importantly, Maharam Wittenberg says it is an established custom, not a strict obligation. Okay. And we will continue with that next time. So what we've done is we've looked at how the actual tzedakah obligations nowadays are very narrow. There are good models in the Torah, some to the poor, that's the light blue, some to the giving to religious institutions. And then Ma'aser Ksafim, it was actually an ancient practice begun by Abraham and Yaakov. That it's okay. It's not yet an obligation. I should say that's not yet an obligation. And then it is, what I should have said is like this, by, here, let's say by, 13th century established practice in Ashkenaz. And then the question is, why? What's its basis? Okay. And Tosfos tries to make it based on a verse, but it really was just a minhag, and it became an established practice in Ashkenaz to take these models and to take what Abraham and Yaakov did and to make it into the regular way of giving tzedakah, at least within Ashkenaz. All right. So if it was a little quick at the end, I hope this helps give people a little bit overview, a little about what we see. And next time,
Linzer, is Kasaf in Kesef?
yeah, Kesef, okay. Tithing money,
Okay.
monies, i.e., i.e. income. Okay. All right. And for next time, you can all, coming up, okay, coming up is, is to what causes gross or net, this is poor or religious, what types of religious,
What types of institutions?
yeah,
Not just religious.
right, what types of institutions, what types of poor, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Counting day school tuition, all of this is coming up. So be here next, okay? All right, everybody. I will send this to Bert, and Bert will send it all around.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, be well.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Forward to
you.
it.